So there's like separate areas for men and for women. And so there's privacy. And here you have like aromatherapy, there's sound therapy with nature sounds and Quran. There is a massage, there's cupping, and there's nutritional care. This sounds like an idealistic hospital of the future. But what if I told you that this was not a vision of the future, but actually a memory from the past? From more than 1,000 years ago, and during the Islamic Golden Age. These were called Dar al-Shifas, or houses of healing, and they were the epitome of holistic care. They were teaching hospitals with residency programs and libraries, and they were the center of communities. They were placed specifically within community centers so that people would come and visit the sick. And so it was a very welcoming environment. They were also very inclusive. So regardless of whether you are rich or poor, you were welcomed. And if you were a traveler or someone from the city itself, you were also welcome. And behind these institutions were incredible Muslim scholars. So the first one I have here is Al-Razi. He was the chief physician of a hospital like this in Baghdad. And he was a supervising physician in what we would essentially call nowadays a residency program. And he also had such meticulous and detailed clinical observations that it laid the foundation for evidence-based medicine. But I think what's even more amazing was his approach to mental health. He was amongst the first to write about mental illness and psychotherapy, and he also really emphasized the connection between the body and the soul, and emphasized treating both with equal care and attention. And then we have Ibn Sina. He expanded on these ideas and emphasized the mind-body connection. He also which now is almost seen as like this modern concept, but he talked about this in the 9th century. And he also laid down the foundation for our modern understanding of the pulse of the heart and arrhythmias and electrophysiology, a lot of these things that now are essential in our understanding of the heart. And then we have Al-Balkhi. He emphasized that housing, exercise, and nutrition impact your mental well-being. And he described mental health as equally important as your physical health, and also highlighted that there is a bi-directional relationship between the two. So your physical health impacts your mental health, and then your mental health impacts your physical health. He also categorized emotional disorders like anxiety and depression, and even explained that they had a biological basis in the brain. And he also, interestingly enough, developed the first form of cognitive therapy centuries before Freud was even born and considered the father of modern psychology. So what I find really interesting, though, is that these ideas occurred in the 9th centuries. Like, that's like so long ago. Meanwhile, modern research is literally just catching up. I can tell you that my previous own research supervisor published research on how exercise impacts your mental health and how they have this relationship. And subhanAllah, she wrote a whole book on it and got so much media attention. And meanwhile, our ancestors, our Islamic scholars pointed this out like 1,000 years ago. What's even more beautiful, though, is the fact that all of these interventions and this holistic healthcare approach was all rooted in our Prophet's teachings. He emphasized that, he taught us that life is not a punishment, but is actually a test. And, you know, in the Quran, we have this beautiful ayah of, indeed with hardship comes ease. So it's not that after your test you'll have ease, but it's within the hardship itself that there's so much khair. And it also reframes our perspective on mental health. If our health consists of different aspects like physical, spiritual, social, psychological, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can test any aspect of that health. And there is khair in that. Islam also teaches us that all of these tests are just a means of purification and forgiveness. You know, the Prophet ﷺ said that if a believer is afflicted with a thorn or a pain or an illness, Allah erases his sins as a result. So this teaches us that the believer, if any believer experiences any form of suffering, whether it's physical pain or emotional struggles or mental distress, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rewards you, and there's khair in that struggle itself by erasing sins. And so Allah can test us in any aspect of our health, and it's all part of our life. And this actually aligns really well with a modern form of therapy called ACT, or acceptance commitment therapy, which really emphasizes that life has struggles and it's about learning how to struggle well. All of that is already kind of taught to us through Islam. And then the second foundation that the Prophet ﷺ laid was in emphasizing the duty to seek cures. He said that for every disease, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made a cure. And so this teaches us that there's no stigma against mental health in Islam, and that we are allowed and in fact encouraged to seek cure and treatment for any mental health struggles that we're going through. And even Aisha radiallahu anha, she treated anxiety, depression, and grief-induced psychosis through medicinal herbal soups. So there is this concept of medicinal or like treatment for these type of illnesses or struggles. There's also a huge emphasis in Islam on dhikr and mindfulness and salah as forms of helping to cope. The Quran says that verily in the remembrance of Allah do hearts find rest. So this means that it is through connecting with Allah that we will find comfort, but that's not the full complete everything. Like you can still seek cures through other means as well, but since health, our spiritual health is part of our health, we have to incorporate that in part of the solution as well. And dhikr is such a beautiful way of emotionally regulating ourselves. In modern research, we have this concept of mindfulness and meditation, and dhikr really aligns with the concept of meditation, where you focus on bringing your attention to a specific either like a concept or an affirmation, focusing on that and focusing on your breathing and just giving your full attention to that, where you're very focused on one thing. And if we do that with our dhikr, that is exactly what meditation is. And meditation has been shown in research to create like beautiful changes in your brain, in your emotional regulation. And the same goes with mindfulness. And our salah is a beautiful form of mindfulness that's been prescribed to us and ingrained into our life that happens 5 times a day. You know, I think salah is the time when I realize the most in my day that I am really like, my mind is going at 1,000,000 miles per hour. Because when you are in a moment of like prayer, you're just trying to focus on your connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and your salah. And you'll find that there's like a running track of thoughts going through your mind of, oh, I have this project due, I have this thing to work on, I have to respond to this email. But salah really helps us kind of check our thoughts and check in with ourselves and find a moment that we are really trying hard to focus on our khushu. And if we are able to get to that point of khushu, it will be essentially a state of mindfulness. And mindfulness, again, like I mentioned, it helps with emotional regulation, it helps with brain changes, it helps with all sorts of mental health struggles. And it's like a built-in stress reliever. So if we view our salah as a way of connecting with Allah and managing our own self-care, it's like a part that's prescribed to us that we can do 5 times a day. The Prophet ﷺ also really taught us how to emotionally regulate our emotions. He taught us how to calm ourselves down in moments of anger, like changing our position, making wudu, seeking refuge in Allah. And these all align well with this mental health concepts of modern grounding techniques, where you try to calm your body and your mind. The Prophet ﷺ taught us these things. And he also taught us to acknowledge and recognize and validate our own emotions. At the Prophet's time, when his son Ibrahim passed away, the companions asked him why he was crying, and were kind of confused because they were like, I thought we were supposed to be patient, and that means we don't cry. But the Prophet ﷺ reminded them that grief is a natural expression and of just being a human being, and that he even said that the eyes shed tears, but the tongue does not say anything except which pleases Allah. So this teaches us that our emotions are not to be repressed, but instead understood and acknowledged. And then our next step is to regulate those emotions and do things that pleases Allah. But at the same time, Allah is not holding you accountable for what emotional experience you're having or the thoughts. It's what you do that matters. And the final point I wanted to share with you was regarding having a balanced approach to health. So he taught us that our health, no matter what it is in our life, we maintain balance with everything. At the time of the Prophet, there were a group of companions who vowed that they would not get married, they'll fast, they won't sleep, and just focus on their worship alone. But he actually encouraged them to, he corrected them and said that, your body has a right upon you. And so this teaches us that our physical, emotional, spiritual well-being are all important. And Islam does not call at all for neglecting one aspect of your health over another, but in fact encourages like having a balanced way in everything in life. So imagine this, like if someone was not praying, would you consider them healthy overall? No. What if someone was really struggling psychologically with anxiety or depression? Are they overall in a healthy state? No. So, as Muslims, to be a healthy Muslim, we have to work towards becoming healthy in all aspects of our life, including our spirituality, our social life, connecting with family, our physical health, our psychological health. Those are all parts of our health, and they're all a part of maintaining and becoming a healthy Muslim and our holistic approach to health. All these teachings were the foundation of the hospitals that I mentioned earlier. So then let's talk about the elephant in the room, the stigma. Despite the Prophet ﷺ's clear teachings and our own, like Islamic history in mental health, there is still a huge mental health stigma. So I want to ask you guys, like, why do you think there is such a mental health stigma within our communities nowadays? Yeah. If you can't see it, it doesn't exist. Culture. Yeah. Uh, Very good point. Western field. Yeah, like it's a sign of weakness of faith. Yeah. hmm Yeah, being labeled as crazy, very commonly done in many cultures. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah, the help, like having to ask for help is the difficult part, and then so much stigma with that. Yeah. Mhm. Mm. That's a very good point. Yeah, that if it's in your mind, then that means it can just be controlled by your thoughts. But we all know that that's very hard to do, and Islam teaches us to acknowledge our emotions and thoughts. Yeah. Yeah, the labeling and the social pressures. Yeah. Yeah, just trust in Allah and everything will be perfect and you won't have any emotional struggles. Mhm. That you just need to become more knowledgeable about Islam and then you'll learn how to manage everything. Like Jazakallah khair everyone for sharing. And you guys hit a lot of the major points that I'm about to talk about. Um, but yeah, you're absolutely right that there's this big misunderstanding that if you're struggling with your mental health, that it means that you have a weakness of faith. But that is not at all what we are taught in Islam. And in fact, Islam teaches us, like we just talked about, that these are different aspects of our health, including our psychological health is part of our health. And so Allah can test you from any of those aspects. And another huge misconception is that this is a modern Western concept, that mental health issues didn't exist in the past. A lot of parents come to me sometimes and they're like, I don't understand why my child is acting like this. There was no such thing like this in my time. You just manage, and it's treated as if it's this new phenomena, but it's not. And we've learned this from our own history as well, that none of this is true. And in fact, Muslims were the pioneers of the mental health field, and they built hospitals that provided the psychiatric support and holistic care. And these hospitals provided talk therapy, medication, occupational therapy, sound therapy, exercise regimes. Like there was such a holistic approach to health that we already used to provide this type of support way before. And these hospitals emphasize that mind body connection like we see now. And so this misconception that mental health concepts are a modern Western issue is just clearly debunked by our own rich Islamic legacy. And, our ancestors understood that mental health is important long before it became a Western mainstream concept. Literally at the time of this Islamic golden age, in Europe, witches were being burnt on the stake. Like they were in their dark ages. Meanwhile, we talked about these things and now they're talking about it now. So you are not weak for having emotions and you don't need to ignore or repress them. And seeking help for mental health is not a sign of weakness, but instead, I would say it's actually a sign of strength. It's about taking responsibility for your own well-being. And just as the Prophet ﷺ taught us and modeled for us, we should seek cures and ensure that we fulfill the right of our mind and our body and the soul that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given to us. And all of these actions are ultimately going to be honoring our Islamic legacy and the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
Alhamdulillah. Alrighty, so we're going to go now to my part of the presentation. First of all, thank you, Sobia, for that amazing intro and foundation setting for our presentation today. My portion of today's presentation is going to be mostly on the practical end of things, like hearing all of the amazing things that our Deen teaches and also the ways in which the Prophet ﷺ has taught us how to implement those. I wanted to come in and say, talk about what are some ways that we can take those teachings and implement them in ways that seem realistic for us. So the goal is, let's do things that have and honor the theme of what's been taught to us, but in ways that are easy, beneficial to us, and offer a balanced opportunity to our lives. So rather than it being something that's burdensome or something that's difficult to do, I really wanted to focus on this part so that at least we're inclined to doing these things because we know they're good, but sometimes it's hard to do them, even if we know it. So first and foremost, there were some interesting things I wanted to talk about first. No, you don't have, this is. All right, so what I was going to talk about in the time that Sobia's getting some stuff up is what I think is really interesting is I think for the most part, a lot of us have had access to self-help guides and people that teach us, oh, these are the things that you should do to increase your productivity, increase your efficiency, self-develop, right? These are things that we hear a lot of buzzwords about. And so we have a good number of things of what to do. But some of those things aren't always the most realistic or the most practical. Like one example is self-help books. So these are I'm pretty sure most of us have heard of Atomic Habits by now. I feel like that's a pretty common one. And for the most part, I'm assuming either you've read it or you've skimmed it enough to know what it's talking about. And if not skimmed it, then you've watched a video. But the thing with self-help books is that, let's say you read all of them. You reach a point where you recognize they're either saying the exact same thing, or they're actually all conflicting, or even worse, the things that you reach a point where you're like, oh, you know what? I think I've done enough where I've focused on a lot of things. I've really improved myself. And then you're like, I'm good. And then you read another book and then you might get to a point where you're like, wait, but I don't do that already. Should I be implementing that? And then you can spiral. You can keep going. Theoretically, you could continue on that path and never stop. But I don't know how conducive that is to living a balanced and healthy life, and one that at least accepts the accomplishments you have actually reached. So rather than focusing on just the self-help books, perhaps an option is to read more fiction books, which lots of people can get hesitant about because they're like, what if you're escaping reality? No, you can enjoy a fiction book as well, but take it for what it is. There's a lot of amazing lessons you can learn from books that tell stories of people and who've gone through really hard things in lives. And they've learned magical, beautiful, life-altering lessons. And we can absolutely learn to implement those. That in itself is something that's helpful. Another thing is affirmations. We hear this a lot, oh, you should wake up in the morning and you should say, I'm brave and I can do this. And that's really good. There is definite science to positive talk and being able to implement those. But the caveat to that is you actually have to believe it. To some degree, you kind of have to believe it to feel like what you're saying is true. So what I kind of suggest as a way to do that is, rather than saying random affirmations that you've heard, collect some things that people have told you about yourself. Like, for instance, a friend commented once saying, you have a really kind personality. That's something that was genuine. Or someone tells you, like, hey, listen, um, I really appreciate the fact that um, you have very good character, or you're very just. Something like that. It's someone genuinely who appreciates you gave a comment to you, and it's something that resonates to the point where maybe you maybe even doubt it. But it would be such an amazing thing that that's something that someone else saw in you, and you can take that as an affirmation where you remind yourself, you're like, listen, I might doubt that I am the kindest person, but clearly other people see it. So perhaps there's some truth to it. So maybe that's the thing that I can wake up in the morning and tell myself. And then another thing is like morning routines. Like we hear about this, right? Who's heard of like the Huberman Lab morning routine? Like you wake up with the sun, 10 minutes out, you're gonna get your electrolytes, you're also gonna not drink coffee for the next 90 minutes, and then you're gonna work out in the next 2 hours. You're gonna try to work in those like the what is it, like the time block. So it's a very extensive routine, and it's also not the most practical. But something that I think is a really like a much more realistic way to think about it is, rather than a routine where you do the exact same things every day, instead you have a menu. So it's kind of like you have options to pick. And based on how you're feeling in the morning, and this can also apply to a night routine, but let's say in the morning you wake up and you're like, listen, I went to bed really late. I had a lot of nightmares. I wasn't able to sleep really well. And I have a really busy day. So I don't have that much time, which means, okay, if I don't have that much time, what are some options in my menu that I can do really quickly? So instead of sitting there like reading Quran for 20 minutes, you're like, listen, I have my morning adhkar. I can do that in a couple minutes. That's what I can pick today. And it's not as though it's a failure that I wasn't able to read the Quran that day. It was a success because I was able to do my adhkar, which is still a really amazing thing to do. So the idea is not we have to reach the standard of being able to accomplish every single thing on that routine, but rather picking from the menu to see what your energy levels are, what your time availability is, and working with that. And then the other thing is screen time. Like we hear this a lot. Like you should not look at your phone within 2 hours before going to bed, because the blue light, all of this, like all of that is going to mess with your circadian rhythm. You're going to have difficulty falling asleep. Okay, that's valid, but also not very realistic, especially when your phone is perhaps your alarm clock, perhaps it's also your calendar, perhaps it's also where you keep track of all of your daily routines and things that you do. Well, in that case, what's a more realistic way to approach using your phone? Maybe you do keep limits to how often you use your phone. Maybe you put in blue light filters. That's something that you use. And perhaps you use your phone rather than a way to doom scroll on social media. You use it as a way to connect with friends and family, and you form those connections, because that in itself is probably more valuable and more beneficial to your health, your overall holistic health, than spending hours on end on TikTok, just going over the same videos and not even noticing the time go by. Okay, so we'll go to the next slide, because the thing that I wanted to talk about more is I'm just going to give like 10 different examples of really common self-care strategies that we hear about and ways in which we can make it easier. Okay, so for instance, mindfulness, meditation, we've heard a lot about it, but it can be really hard if, one, you're very like hyperactive, you have trouble sitting down for that long or staying still for that long. So what are some things you can do instead? You could perhaps do a puzzle. You could solve a crossword. You can do something that, like, do a repetitive task that doesn't require you to have to think about. So this can be a lot of arts and crafts type of exercise, like activities, or whether it's like building Lego kits. Like that in itself is a very therapeutic thing, because you're focused on the task. So you are quite mindful. You're mindful of the thing that you're doing. At the same time, it doesn't require extra stress. All right. Yes, so that's my example for that. Journaling is also something that can be really difficult to do. But some easier ways to do it is you can voice note yourself. You can also photo journal. So rather than writing words, you can create a collection of all the pictures that you've taken that, summarize your day. You can do bullet points instead of full journal entries. There's things like that where you can make it easier and ergo more approachable. Other things include physical exercise, which is something we love to hear about and find it very difficult to do often. But there's always ways to make it more approachable. If you're not able to go to the gym, then what can you do at home? If you're not able to do a whole 45-minute workout, can you go for a walk? Can you go, can you do short exercises in between little tasks? Like whether, like let's say you have a 5 minute break. And so you're like, okay, let me just do some push-ups. Or you know what? I have this like 5 minute little moment right between something. Let me just quickly do an exercise. Or let's say instead of taking the elevator, if you're able to, then take the stairs. Things like that, where you try to incorporate more physical exercise and activity throughout the day rather than trying to designate a specific time that you might miss. Same thing with a healthy diet. When you're trying so hard to maintain a diet, it's tough, okay? Especially if you don't have time, it's expensive. And honestly, it's sometimes not as tasty looking because you're like, oh, but junk food is so much more tasty and can seem so much more appealing. But things that you can do to make it easier is having more snack options that are healthier. Whether it's having pre-cut healthy snacks available for you to use in those moments. And also like starting small, right? Like the idea is not to overhaul your entire diet, it's to just implement small changes that can actually lead to more benefits. Like there's this really common saying, like you rise, no, what's it? You don't rise to the level of your no, I'm messing it up. Who knows? You know, absolutely. That's the one. Thank you very much. Yes, it is. Exactly. Isn't it hilarious? Because we all like it's just a thing. But I mean, I'll say that's a very valid point. Um, the idea being that we can have all these goals, we can have all these things of how we want to eat, how we want to exercise, how we want to be as people, but more often than not, when a slight barrier comes in the way, something comes in between us, we're not going to go in our extra way, the extra mile to implement those habits. We're going to default to what we're used to. So rather than trying to do a big change, maybe make the default a little easier to do. Make the default a little better. Slowly implement that so that if something comes up, the default's still something you're proud of. Another thing is just, spending time with family and friends. Sometimes it's really hard to meet them. Maybe an occasional phone call is good. Same thing with like practicing gratitude. Sometimes it can feel forced, sometimes it can feel repetitive, but what's really nice is if you have that reminder of let me try to implement gratefulness throughout my day. So whether it's like I'm talking to my friends and yeah, I might be complaining about an assignment that I have and it's really difficult, but then I can say, wait, alhamdulillah, though, there is this one thing I'm grateful for, even in the midst of this. It's an idea of adding balance to that thought that you might be struggling, and there absolutely is. But the idea of there is ease in struggle, that idea is that you can be going through something tough and still at the same time recognize what is good about it. And that's a very difficult thing to do sometimes, but it is really amazing when you're able to implement that. It can change your perspective. Let's see if there's anything else. Okay, so there's also reading for relaxation. That's an interesting one because we hear that a lot, like, oh, you should read more. It's sometimes hard to do that, but I mean, I will say that like podcasts and audiobooks are really great as a substitute. If you're not able to physically read the books, it's very nice, especially, hey, if you implement walking with the audiobooks. If you're working out and you're listening to those, that's double. So actually, there's nothing you're losing there. Am I missing anything else? What did I get? Let's see. Yoga, stretching. I mean, like we talk about this, but stretching is genuinely beyond, like, interestingly enough, when you think about physical exercise, there's always like three things that are the most important. One is cardio, the other one is weights, like weightlifting, and the third one is stretching, it's mobility. And those three aspects, if you like focus on with your physical health, like you get a really well-balanced approach to your physical activity and exercise. So stretching is really important, but sometimes it seems cumbersome. You might not do it. You might not even realize you need it. But again, just like how you can incorporate like exercise throughout your day, you can also do stretches occasionally, like one stretch here or there occasionally. Also, like it's nice to do like massages to yourself if that's a thing that comes up. And I'm trying to think, what are some other things you could do? Yeah, I think that's pretty much it for that. The last two that I'll talk about are the digital detox and the deep breathing. Digital detoxes we hear a lot about just because we get so much stimulation from our social media. But at the same time, what can be helpful is you either put like limiting, like time limit apps on your phone to help kind of limit how much you're watching something. At the same time, you can also do mini detoxes rather than going a month without social media. Maybe you go a day, maybe you go a week, something that's more approachable. And then you build that habit of, okay, maybe I don't need to rely on my phone as much as I think I did. Also with deep breathing, this is really interesting, but like we hear about how breathing is so beneficial, and it truly, truly is. But sometimes it's hard to just like remember to breathe deeply. So something to do, which is really cool, is like singing and humming can also do that. Like it can also help regulate your breathing. Um, Things that like blowing, like this is really cute, but like blowing bubbles is also an example of trying to regulate your breathing. And any sort of activity that requires your heart rate to elevate, where your breathing has to be controlled, whether that's walking, whether that's swimming, those are things that also can help with your like deep breathing exercises. So that's pretty much it in terms of like the practical sort of examples that I had. So I'm going to give it back to Sobia to talk about our very, very exciting exam care kits.
So, because we love you guys, we have a little gift for you, and it's for exam season coming up. It has a little bit of some treats and an exam care kit. We'll show it. We'll show it to you later and give you more information about that. But for now, we're gonna actually transition to our amazing sheikhs and get some more inspiration from them. They don't want to come.
It's up to you. Whatever you want. Do you want this?
Minna, you wanna go first? Sheikh? Wanna go first? Few words, inshallah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulil Ameen. To be honest, I'm still jet lagged. I just got back from a journey and been up for 20 hours, so I'm a little bit groggy. Uh, I wanted to say Jazakallah khairan to Sobia and Duha. They kind of summarize the topic really well. This on the subject of mental health, and especially being a taboo subject to some extent. I feel like it's important that we do recognize it. And again, same topics, same highlight what they said already. If you look in life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we know about Amul Huzn, the year of grief. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam experienced it himself. Lost his wife Khadija radiallahu anha, lost his uncle, and that same year as well, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was exiled from the Quraysh in Mecca, and he went to Taif, and we know the story what happened to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam there. And later on, when he was in Medina, Aisha radiallahu anha, she asked the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, what was the most difficult experience that you went through? And he said it was that, the incident of Taif and that year as well. So again, if the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam can go through such distress and hardships, who are we not to go through them? Right? And alhamdulillah, we have treatments, we have individuals we can talk to, our shuyukh at ISNA as well, our team of therapists as well. And again, with this, especially we look at some of the fitan, some of the trials that we go through nowadays. Some of them are, whether it may be addictions, things that we look at we're not supposed to look at, experiences that we go through, whether it's domestic abuse. These things are happening, and they happen in our community. And what I tell individuals is, alhamdulillah, we have such programs and services now where if we need to go seek support in a confidential way, we have that. So, if we know someone, whether it's a friend, whether it's a family member, whether it's a colleague, whether it's a classmate, these care kits we have, these teams that we have, the Sheikh, Sheikh Hosam come here every single week making time for us. I think we should utilize it if we need it. And that's the main thing for myself. Again, I think in a care kit is also so what is one dua that we can actually what's the takeaway for us? With this today, I'll end with that. One is we know the hadith, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, one day he entered the masjid and it was not the time of prayer. And Abu Umama radiallahu anhu, he was in the masjid, and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Yeah, Umama, why do I see you in the masjid in this time when it's not time for prayer?" So again, he recognized that he was going through some distress, and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam taught him the dua. And I think this is the dua we have in the care kits, right, Sobia? So I mean, again, that's the dua that we read at time of distress. Shall I leave the last piece for Sheikh Hosam to give some advices? And again, we're all four of us are here to answer any questions.
طيب السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. How is everyone doing? Alhamdulillah. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. May Allah bless you, Sister Sobia, Sister Duha. May Allah bless Sheikh Bimat and the whole team here. May Allah put barakah in all that you do, Ya Rabb. Ameen. I'll keep it brief, inshallah. There's a story of a man named Munqidh ibn Habban ibn Amr. And Munqidh, he used to love business and trade. He was a merchant in Medina. And he went to the Battle of Uhud. And in the Battle of Uhud, he was hit very hard on his head with a sword. And since then, he was not able to be as effective in his day-to-day encounters, in his business. So as a matter of fact, people used to come to him and used to take advantage of him being a little bit slower in his arithmetics, in his calculation, his decision-making. And they used to basically buy things from him at a really ridiculous price and take advantage of his mental and cognitive state. So his family, and the grandson narrates this in Sahih Bukhari, he comes to the Prophet ﷺ and he says, Ya Rasulullah, we are not able to stop him. He loves business so much, but the losses are immense. So we need you as the messenger of Allah and as the figure of the state at the time to intervene and to do what's called hijr. Hijr is where you prevent somebody from accessing their own wealth because of their mental state. And we hope that that will hopefully reduce the losses. The Prophet ﷺ, he brings Munqidh ibn Habban and he tells him, so what's going on? And he tells him, Ya Rasulullah, ever since the Battle of Uhud and the hit, this has been happening, that has been happening, but I really don't want to lose the business and I don't want to lose the opportunity to give. So the Prophet ﷺ, in his conversation with him, he laid out some amazing foundations for how to deal with, this is one form of mental health deterioration that can happen, right? It could be physical, it could be psychological. It's some form of trauma that can lead to these outcomes. So Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam first addresses the business aspect. And he says, look, I'm not going to do hijr on your business. I'm not going to prevent you from accessing your wealth because you're in a good enough state to be able to manage. And here Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is actually enabling him and empowering him, not taking away his agency. Transformational. He's instead, I want you to add in every transaction a verbal clause, which is لا خيال ولي الخيار ثلاثة. Very simple words, which means no deception either way, and I have the option to pull out from any business transaction for up to 3 days. So let's say we sign an agreement, we have 3 days to go back and to discuss, and if there's any kind of deception, which then becomes a chapter in Islamic finances and Islamic trade. It's called al-ghabn or al-ghubn, and that's where Surah Al-Taghabun's name comes from. It's a huge loss that becomes catastrophic. So a phone worth $200, but you sell it to somebody for $2,000. You're making 10x, so you're definitely taking advantage of the person. And Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, after giving him this clause, which becomes transformational in finances, then he tells him, remember that every phase of life comes with ups and downs, and you may not be able to, really achieve what you used to in your former self, but there will be many other doors that will open in your path. So don't lose positivity and stay as optimistic as possible. And I'll be here if you need anything. If anybody takes advantage of the situation, just tell them, I'll go speak to the Prophet ﷺ. He's my witness in these transactions. Another example of this is, and again, this is even more important as Disability Week is coming up. the Prophet ﷺ, there was this man who lost sight. He was physically blind, and he was also, subhanallah, afflicted with a limp later on in his life. So people used to say, oh, the blind man, that blind man from Bani Amir. And the Prophet ﷺ, instead, actually, he says, no, we're not going to call him the blind man. We're going to say what? Al-Basiru alladhi fi Bani Amir. He used to call him the man with great insight. Great insight. So here the Prophet ﷺ is teaching us ways to actually refer the words that we use, how we address people, how we speak about them, and how we speak to them. We don't magnify the limitation. Rather, we can actually use the same word in opposites to refer to the person. You may not be able to see, but Allah has given you great insight. So you can't see physically, but you can see through your heart. You can think beautifully. You can see the world clearly in ways that many people have eyes cannot actually see. So you're actually a person of sight, not a person of lack of sight. You're a person of insight. And so there are many examples of this where the Prophet ﷺ teaches people how to address, how to talk about this, right? And he, ﷺ, of course, as alluded to earlier by Sister Sobia, the talbina was a physical mix, barley, wheat, some milk, a little bit of honey. They would mix this and they would add some other ingredients like black seed, depends on the different tribes they would come from. And this would be prescribed to somebody who's going through bereavement or a mother who recently gave birth, because the Arabs did recognize a form of postpartum depression or post-delivery, like a mood disorder. So here the Prophet ﷺ's wife, Aisha radiallahu anha, when she would have or hear news of somebody who just gave birth, she would actually prescribe this. And they said to her, where did you get this from? She said, Rasulullah ﷺ used to prescribe this as well. So it goes to show you that the companions had a system of language and a system of respect and affirmation to people going through these difficulties, and a system of maintaining their dignity within the community, and a system of also seeking cure, as we heard. مَا مِن دَاءٍ إِلَّا وَجَعَلَ اللَّهُ لَهُ دَوَاءً. There's no disease except that Allah has given a cure for. عَلِمَهُ مَنْ عَلِمَهُ وَجَهِلَهُ مَنْ جَهِلَهُ. Either you know about it or either you don't. But in addition to that, there was also a system within the Quran of dealing with these things and affirming the existence of these mental states. And one beautiful example of that is Maryam alayhi salam in Surah Maryam. What do we hear about Maryam saying when she hears the stigma that is being said about her, and when she is going through the physical pain of labor? She says, "Ya laytani mittu qabla hada wa kuntu nasyan mansiya." I wish I had died before this moment, and I wish I was a forgotten entity that never existed. So imagine she's saying, I wish I had died before I could be in this moment, or I wish I was a forgotten entity. So that goes to show you that, like, she's an icon, a metaphor. She's Sayyidat Nisa al-Jannah, the most complete of women and the most complete of, in many ways, human beings. The masters from the women of the people of Jannah, as the Prophet ﷺ said. So, her level, a miraculous birth, the mother of Isa alayhi salam, she herself was prophesied, all of these things, and some even within the tradition, some of the Hanafis and some of the other schools as well, the Shafi'is, considered her to be a prophet. They said women can be prophets, and there was an early debate whether women can or cannot, and the evidence from the Quran, it's a big discussion, but at least some of these earlier Shafi'is considered her to be a prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it was exceptions, very few exceptions. One of them was Maryam. Nonetheless, her, whether she's, again, the mother of a prophet or a miracle of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, at the end of the day, she went through something like this, which is so, again, painful to the point where she wished death. That's suicidal thoughts, suicidal, ideation to some extent. But what happens? It's a passing one. It's a passing one. It's not one that lurks and not one that you take active steps towards. It's a passing thought. And what I mean in citing this is to suggest and to remind us that it can happen to the best of us. It can happen to the best of us. As Sheikh Bimat mentioned, one whole year called Aam al-Huzn, the year of sorrow. And the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam says, "Inna al-ayna tadma' wal-qalba yahzan." When Ibrahim, his son, passed away, Indeed, the eyes shed tears, the heart feels sorrow. But لا نقول إلا ما يرضي الله. I affirm my states, I affirm my feelings, but I'm in control of the narrative. I'm going to control it. I'm not going to say except that which pleases Allah. قدر الله وما شاء فعل. Whatever Allah wills has happened, and His decree has indeed come to be. So He taught us how to navigate emotions, how to navigate difficulties, how to navigate stress, how to navigate bereavement, and He gave us the foundation. Ibn al-Qayyim, he would eventually author the book At-Tibb al-Nabawi. He would list more than 150 different forms of medicinal ingredients that the Prophet ﷺ used, or the companions at his time used, and there's an entire section there dedicated to what? Dedicated to psychosis, and dedicated to psychosomatic symptoms, and dedicated to psychospiritual ailments as well, where depression and huzn and sadness and sorrow can actually cripple and stunt your spiritual connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So there's a lot. And for those of you who know, for example, Dr. Rania Awad from the Muslim Mental Health and Islamic Psychology Lab at Stanford University, and she's a great source to read as well. She published and wrote a few articles on Imam al-Balkhi, or the great al-Balkhi, in his book, The Sustenance of the Mind and the Soul, Masalih al-Abdan wal-Anfus. What did he say? He laid down a foundation for how to deal with OCD. And he gave the description of the symptoms. And not only that, the symptoms, if you actually look at them, were the diagnostic tools that he had, or the diagnostic symptoms that he would use, they're actually literally word for word what is mentioned in the DSM-5. Word for word. You literally compare what he had as a diagnostic tool versus what the DSM-5 would use, literally word for word. So the tradition, to summarize, the tradition is rich. From the time of the Prophet ﷺ, there are many examples and sources to go back to that will guide the way that we deal with these things. And most importantly, it can happen to the best of us. So seeking wellness and health is important. Prevention is better than cure. But also seeking tadaw ya ibadallah, seek help, O servants of Allah, because Allah has not made or allowed for any disease to exist except that there's a cure. The one who knows it, and the one who's ignorant of it is ignorant of it. But do your best to seek that cure and to seek that remedy, especially if you have resources around you to help. Now, there's a component also which, sometimes what happens, it's a lot easier for men, specifically, the way we have been socially conditioned in the Muslim community. It's a lot easier for men to brush aside mental health issues or mental health struggles or mental health challenges. One of the biggest things that I hear, especially from guys who are, leading projects or leading charity organizations or masajid or serving at a large scale, the sense of, no, I don't believe in burnouts. I don't believe in burnouts don't exist. I'm okay. I'm doing fine. Bro, take it easy. Take care of yourself. Take care of your health. No, I don't believe in that. This mental health stuff is not, I'm kind of the exception. No, the Prophet ﷺ, he had breaks too. And he told us, وَلِبَدَنِكَ عَلَيْكَ حَقًّا وَلِأَهْلِكَ عَلَيْكَ حَقًّا وَلِضَيْفِكَ عَلَيْكَ حَقًّا. Your body has a right upon you. Your guest has a right upon you. Your family has a right upon you. Right? And even Aisha radiallahu anha, when she was holding the head of the Prophet ﷺ, when he passed away, there's one really remarkable thing that she said. She said, أَهْلَكَهُ النَّاسِ. He was always available and there for people to the point where they drove him to his own demise. So that concern, that love, that care. And the Prophet ﷺ, he's dedicated his life to the ummah. So you can actually be so focused on your service and your work and what you do and your pursuit for the people around you. You want to make your family happy. You want to make your mom happy. You want to make people happy. So you put on a strong face. You want to become almost invincible, completely available, dedicated, all of these qualities that are associated with, a sense of positive masculinity. And that's great. But don't be afraid to talk to somebody that you trust, somebody that's not going to exploit that vulnerability. And it's difficult. I know it's difficult, especially among men. But find somebody that you can talk to and talk, have that conversation. Seek help if it's available. The team at ISNA and generally in the community now, we have lots of resources that respect confidentiality, that are accessible, that are respectful, that are not going to make you feel vulnerable or exploit that vulnerability, but there to empower you and to support you throughout, whether, again, you're a guy or you're a sister. Again, those resources are available. فجزاكم khair. May Allah bless you. Give you Jannat Firdaus. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Jazakallah khair, everyone, for coming out this evening. I remember when I was in undergrad or like in uni, it was very, very hard to like get a moment to do things that you enjoy. And I know you probably have like a million things on your mind and on your to-do list. So I pray and maybe one of the sheikhs can make a group dua for us. But I pray that you have an amazing exam season. We have this little gift for you. We'll give it to you as you walk out. But I want to just tell you about maybe you should demonstrate it, because you're the expert demonstrator. So we have like these exam success kits that we made for you. And if you open it, it has it's small enough that you can keep it in your wallet and stuff, but it talks to you about what stress is, and also it has a checklist or a way to check in for yourself. I think a lot of us often don't acknowledge how much we're actually being affected by the things we're going through. So this has an objective list for you to check in. So and then it also gives practical tips for taking care of yourself. And then it has some duas for pre-exam time, as well as a little pre-exam motivation pep talk thing that you can read before you walk in. So we hope you find that beneficial, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make the coming exam season be an amazing one for you, and put lots of barakah in every effort that you do, surround you with people that love and support you, and give you lots and lots of success in this life and in the next. Ameen. جزاك الله خير.
When I close the dua, you do it.
You're the head of the show.
Sorry, we forgot the last part. Do you guys have any questions? If you have any questions, yes. Okay, so the best way I think I can describe it is, one, of course, you need to practice self-care, but you can divide it into two categories. One is repair, and the second is maintenance. So maintenance is something that you do on a regular basis, like you work out, you do any of those other, your hobbies, interests, whatever you like. Even if it's video gaming, I think it can be helpful to some extent as well. I think it can be very helpful actually to help you focus and be mindful and do something that you enjoy. But whatever it is, that maintenance is something you do on a regular basis to maintain yourself. Repair is something you do in the moment that there's actually a stressor that you actually find that one day you're struggling a lot more. That day you have to practice some repair. So we have things like grounding techniques, things to make you feel more calm physically, to calm yourself physically, and then you do something that will take care of your health and all the things Duha talked about.
I think the only thing I'd add to that is based on here's the thing, you get to a point of burnout when you've taken on more than you can bear, and you no longer have the energy, time, or will to keep going and do it to the extent and standards that you set for yourself. So the thing is that if you were unable to find systems that work for you to get to a point where you could manage those things, burnout is just a sign that you did too much and you need to slow down. So the answer to that in terms of how you do it, absolutely what you said. And to add to that, when you reach a point, which we really hope you don't, but sometimes it happens, the answer is to prioritize the things you actually need to get done versus the things you're doing because they're good or you really want to do them, because your capacity to actually do it is just lessened. So prioritize the most important things because the limited amount of energy you have to distribute it to those. And then the things that need to take the side for now, you let them take a side until you're able to accomplish those things and get back to prioritizing things. Because your priorities are basically, regardless of if you have burnout or you're working at 100% capacity, you're always going to have to prioritize. It's literally that's the only thing, right? We would love to be able to do all of this, but we can't. So prioritize. I would love for the chef to answer that. Did you hear the question?
So the question is, if one's mental state damages their ibadah, how much of their distance from Allah is sinful and how much of it are they forgiven for? Or, like, another way to say it is, how much of that damage are they accountable for? Like, what are they sinful for and what are they forgiven for?
Very good question.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. For me, I think the best answer for this is the hadith of Abu Hurairah radiallahu anh, where he mentions that a companion came to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and said, Ya Rasulullah, when I'm with you, my iman is so high. You know, like state of my spirituality, my belief, my own, again, like, first of all, if you look at this hadith, you want to look at in context of when this was going on, right? This is when there was a lot of persecution going on in Medina, like this is around the time of the like the Khandaq, the battle of the trenches. A lot of the Jews in Medina were plotting against the Muslims. So again, a lot of things are going on externally that you cannot control. So and then this companion comes to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and says, Ya Rasulullah, we're with you, our iman is very high. And when we leave you, we have these constant thoughts are going through our mind. If we were to verbalize them, you would not even look at us. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, this is a sign of your iman. And this is as humans being on earth, when we were created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the angels, they questioned Allah, like you're creating humans, and they're going to spread mischief and facade on earth. So the point is, I think the self-reflection, our whether it's mental health, whether it's situations that we cannot control, whether it's doubts that we go through, as long as we're able to reflect over it and ultimately be aware of ourselves, our shortcomings, turn back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This was the experience we went through, and Allah is aware of this, the deepest parts of our heart and our thoughts and our mind. Allah is aware of it. And that goes back to the verse in Surah Al-Furqan, إِلَّا مَنْ تَابَ وَآمَنَ وَعَمِلَ صَالِحًا فَأُولَٰئِكَ يُبَدِّلُ اللَّهُ سَيِّئَاتِهِمْ حَسَنَاتٍ. Whenever we go through anything, as long as we turn back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through repentance, even if it's an action that was externally not good, but we repented with sincerity, Allah will change that into good deeds as well. So this is the way I look at it, and maybe Shaykh Hosam wants to maybe add 1-2 points of his own. You have any position?
Bismillah. Thank you, Sheikh Bima. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم, he says, الصلاة هي العهد الذي بيننا وبينهم. The prayer is the covenant between us and one another. Meaning it's the one thing that qualifies you as a Muslim or disqualifies you as a Muslim. It is so, again, pivotal and so important to the faith. It becomes the imad, the cornerstone of faith. So for that reason, I would say that we have to be very, very, very careful to echo what Sheikh Bimat says. Allah is the most forgiving. Allah is the most merciful. Allah is always a source of love. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows you better than you know yourself. But لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها and لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا ما آتاها. Allah will not obligate you to do anything that is beyond your capacity, and Allah will not ask you to do anything beyond the resources around you to be able to meet those goals and meet those conditions or meet those obligations. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made the obligation of prayer an obligation upon us, it takes into account the states that we go through, up and down, and emotional states and physiological states. So be very careful to commit to the prayer and not undermine the prayer. Even if you're going through the most difficult of positions and difficult of states. إلا صلاتي ما أخليها, as Mishari says in his nasheed, right? Except for my prayer, I will not let that go. That's the one thing that we should never compromise on. So to the point where the Prophet ﷺ, he says, if you are not able to stand, pray sitting. If you can't pray sitting, pray lying down. If you can't pray lying down, pray with your eyes. If you can't move your eyes, pray in your brain. Like imagine yourself going through the motions. And if you can't, then you're probably dead. So pray before you're dead. He didn't say the last part. That's my addition, right? So do not compromise the prayer. And the problem is, if you have a diagnosis and a professional diagnosis, that's one thing. And Islam, inshallah, is very accommodating of that. We know that, right? Someone who's not able to physiologically perform fasting is exempt. But the problem is when you diagnose yourself, you're like, oh, I have OCD, I'm depressed, I have this, I have that. Khalas, I diagnose myself and I give myself the license, no prayer for 6 weeks, I need some time off. This is part of my recovery. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. And I've seen that happen, by the way. I've seen, khalas, you've diagnosed yourself and you've given yourself the prescription, and salah you've exempted yourself from it. That's very problematic. So my advice would be pray, 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 pray. It's going to be part of the solution, not going to be part of the problem. And if you have, if at any moment the prayer becomes an obstacle, then it's a sign, indication of something else. Like there's something going on spiritually. There might be spiritual abuse. There might be something. So seek out help to understand what's going on and unpack what's happening. And if it comes to a point where physiologically, you cannot perform the prayer, and professionally that is the case, then know for sure that inshallah you will be forgiven, because then it's outside of your control, not within your will and control. Tamam? May Allah bless you, Ya Rabbi. Ameen. Yes. Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah. Yeah. So the original context, did everybody hear the question, by the way? لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها. Is it that Allah does not obligate from the law, Sharia, that which the human being cannot handle? Meaning every rule of Allah is handleable, to use the word, I'm just inventing a word, right? Every obligation of Allah is tolerable, versus no difficulty in life is going to happen to you except that you're able to cope. Look, the original meaning, it's talking about the laws and the obligation, because the word taklif literally means obligation. It's not test, it's taklif. But however, some scholars derive from that, because Allah will not obligate more than what you can handle, by extension, the obligation to stay strong and to stay committed, and that is an obligation. So meaning whatever in life you have, it should be, inshallah, within your capacity to overcome it enough to perform the obligations. But the problem is, sometimes we say, Allah did this to me, it's a test from Allah, but in many ways, we actually do it to ourselves. A lot of the issues in our lives are byproducts of what? The decisions that we make. So sometimes it's not that Allah will not test you with more than, it's actually you yourself have to put limits to make sure that you don't set yourself up to fail. And that's where the real discipline comes in. You know, the example that the sister gave earlier, burning out. طيب, who did Allah force you to burn out? In many ways, it's ambition. It's also a little bit of lack of self-awareness. It's getting too hungry. It's getting too greedy. It's going too fast. Those are things that we do for ourselves. But when you get to a point of burnout, I've seen people burn out so much that they can't even perform the salah. They're just so crippled. It takes a lot more to get up and to pray. So keep in mind that sometimes we are the objects, and sometimes we are the subjects of our own tests and challenges. But at the end of the day, just know that whatever Allah obliges, inshallah, it'll be within our capacity to overcome. And the human being is a great being when it comes to adaptation. So inshallah, you'll always find a way to come back within that time. Okay? You want to say anything else?
I also just wanted to add in something. You know, the sheikhs like really answered the question very well. But just from like a practical therapist point of view, I've had like many clients that come in and they're really struggling with their salah or any specific aspect of their deen. And they're it's interesting because if you reflect on when that struggle began, often it has to do with either childhood trauma or like the way that religion was taught at a young age, or also maybe there was something going on at that time that caused a dip in their deen as well. So, for example, they were being bullied at school and they're really struggling, and then they abandon their prayer and they're struggling with depression. With depression, we see people don't even get up to brush their teeth, let alone take a shower. We can see the impacts of mental health really coming in the way of your everyday life, including just eating or like taking a shower, your hygiene. And what we sometimes do in therapy is really bringing in that Islamic point of view of you take one step towards Allah, He'll take a leap towards you. You walk towards Him, He'll run towards you. So going in with that mindset that even if I make a small little effort, that is still a start. And maybe for that person, they're struggling to even get out of bed, then maybe we'll start with, let's say when the azan happens, we're gonna at least think or do some dhikr at that time. Like we'll start with that baby step and work towards actually getting to that point where we're being more consistent with our salah, because it's supremely important. But think about someone who's experiencing addiction, you know, like alcoholism, right? With that, you can't just, with a lot of different types of addictions, you can't just go cold turkey on them. It can have actual negative impacts on you physically. So it's about reducing those things slowly. And at the same time, maybe that person is not able to pray because their, you know, wudu is nullified because they're in a state of, what's it called? Is it? Yeah, like intoxication. But even then, if they're at least making an effort to think about Allah at those times, it'll build that habit and we can start bit by bit. And yeah, like Allah doesn't test you with more than you can bear, and everything is an opportunity for learning and growth. And through this, maybe working on our connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as well. Like, how come our salah was impacted? Are we frustrated with Allah? How do we view Allah? Is He a vengeful God, someone who wants to punish us, who hates us? Or is He someone who has supreme mercy that loves you so much more than you could even love yourself? You know, and just changing our perspective on Allah really has a positive impact I've seen in therapy as well. You want to? You know, well, the way so counseling, the way that it works, I'll just explain that a bit, is that they're 50-minute sessions that you have with one person, and it's one-on-one, generally. But there's also like couples counseling, family therapy. You can bring in a parent. But on campus, it's me, and then otherwise we also have like our shayukh that you can book with, and we have other therapists at ISNA that you can book with or online. There's so many organizations that do this as well. But I think it's really important and helpful to book with someone who's Muslim, who understands your spiritual background as well. And the way that therapy helps is that in the first few sessions, you might do more like talking about your history, what's been going on, you're presenting concerns. It's like when you go to the doctor, right? You tell them what's going on, the symptoms. Then the next steps would be us figuring out what are your goals? Like what changes do you want to see in your life? And then therapy is working towards those goals, setting small goals at a time and working towards that. And that is how therapy can help students or anyone in general. Yeah, does that answer your question?
Okay, I think Sobia did a really good job summarizing kind of what therapy looks like and what you can get out of it. Something I think of when I think of therapy as a way to help improve, because the whole topic today is how to be a better Muslim, a healthy Muslim, right? When you look at your career, you're like, okay, what is a way to advance in my career and get better? I want to find a mentor. Okay, great. If I want to get better with the deen, what do? I need to find a teacher. Okay, great. If I want to get better with my health, I go to my doctor. There is always someone you go to for advice. Islam teaches you this, that you never just rely on yourself. You have a community. You have to lean on them. Not only that, but you have to do your due diligence to seek out the betterment. To improve yourself, you cannot just rely on yourself. You have to rely on others. There is wisdom and knowledge outside that you can get through other people. So if you look at it as if, you know, it's okay to like call up an old prof and be like, hey, can we meet for coffee? And you go meet for them and you go meet them and you talk to them and you gain some knowledge about that. That's very normal, right? And that's very common. It's very accepted. This is just another way to do that. But this is like specific goals to your mental health. So if you're struggling with something personal, and the really great thing about therapy is it's confidential. And it's so confidential that if you were to say something, it doesn't go out of that room. It's not like you could, like, that's it. Meaning a lot of people have that hesitancy of like, okay, I'm ashamed to share this, or I've never said this to anyone before. We've heard that a lot. And we respect that because that is a very, like, that is a huge responsibility on us. You know what I mean? Like, that is an amana we have been given. So we don't take that lightly. And I think that is something that, like, I wanted to just stress to you guys, that as much as it is difficult to get to this point, recognize that we also consider it a very big step for you. And we respect that immensely because it's not easy. So, yeah, thank you.
And if you feel judged by your therapist, it's their fault. If they break confidentiality, you can sue them. Like, you're protected. It's a safe space for you, okay? And no one should know like anything. Like, literally, if someone calls and says, "Hey, like, I've been paying for therapy for my wife, but is she coming in?" We can't even answer that question. Like, oh, like, you're protected so much with confidentiality and legal laws that protect you. Don't worry about that. Yeah, you go to the college.
Sorry, say that again. Okay. And then, like, what's someone that has like really high standards? I'm thinking.
Just to clarify, you're asking how, like, what is a healthy, like, what should our standards be, right? Yeah. And I think, like, with everything, we always bring ourselves back to our biggest role model in Islam. And who is that? Exactly, for Prophet ﷺ. And so when we look at the way he took care of himself, the way that, he would oil his hair and comb it, he would brush his teeth very often, he miswak very often, he smelled good, like, he would take care of himself physically as well. He took care of his weight and those things. He was involved in his family, in his relationships. He took good care of his wife, his wives. And the goal is essentially that we try our best, and we are always in this path towards a good direction, towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, closeness to Him. Because, Allah can take away anything at any point. He can take away your physical health. But that doesn't mean now you're not a healthy Muslim anymore. You are given certain things in your life, like, natural abilities and some disadvantages, and that's just a part of being a human being. But as long as you're doing your best, and your best changes every day, right? Like, if one day you come home and you're exhausted and you're like, I can't do a workout right now, like, I'm just so exhausted, then your best today is maybe to rest, right? Like, it changes day to day. But as long as you're going towards the right direction and you're following the sunnah of the Prophet, you're trying your best to be the best Muslim as you can, and you're praying to Allah that Allah helps you and become better, that's it. I think that's how I would ground myself and kind of take off that pressure, because sometimes there's so much pressure that you have to be perfect student, perfect child, perfect. You can never mess up as like a daughter or like a son. But we're humans, we're gonna make mistakes, and it's all part of that journey. And as long as Islam is a path, it's not a destination. You just have to be on that path, and that's it. Like, as long as you're trying your best, that's okay. Yeah. Is that like the cup thing where it's like emptying your cup or like filling your cup? I feel like I've heard of that. Oh.
So what's the question?
I mean, I think that makes sense for like even people without chronic illness that you have a limited amount of energy in a day. There's this really good YouTube channel that I always recommend. It's called the School of Life. It's called School of Life. And it talks about how just because you can fit like 10 meetings in a day and you can fit like an exercise workout and you can fit like a trip to LA, I don't know, like you can fit everything into your schedule that day, it's logistically possible, doesn't mean that it's a healthy thing to do. And we don't, I guess what I'm related to the spoon theory is that you do have a limited amount of energy in the day and it all goes back to prioritization. Yeah, that makes sense.
Like if you're looking at prioritization as, I think that's what the spoon theory kind of encapsulates, just like prioritize. From the 2-second education that I just did, that is what I think it's about. Correct me if I'm wrong, but based on that, if the spoon theory is essentially like, okay, if I have the capacity to only do this much, that's what I'll do. That's just another fancy way of saying prioritization, meaning these are the only things I'm capable of doing, so this is what I'm going to choose to do. And so if we're looking at it from an Islamic lens, then fard above nafil, like you do fard above sunnah, like you're going to do the things that are mandatory as the priority, and all the other things that are good to do and are nice but are not obligatory, you're going to put on the, you're going to like pause until you're actually capable of doing those things as well. So that is my answer. I hope the person has it. The exam care kit.
So, okay, I think that, you know, what you asked was, how can we become strong that little things don't affect us? Um, I think that goes back to maybe working on sometimes like emotional regulation or like how we manage with stress. It's all about like actively taking action towards managing our stress in those moments. So if let's say we have an argument with like a family member and it leads to like an outburst and anger, like we're responding back like very angrily, we're yelling, you know, those are all just signs that maybe we need to work on some emotional regulation or stress management.
So part of what your question, I think, entails is the idea of how to become more resilient, I believe. Yeah, okay. So when it comes to the topic of resilience, it can look different for every single thing you're trying to become more resilient in. One thing that's, you know, kind of like it's not an easy answer. It takes time and experience. Like that is for sure one way to do it. The other way is just developing strategies and ways in which that help you be able to handle it better. Like for instance, let's say you're stressing over an exam. Well, what are things that can make it easier? Is it how you study for an exam? Is it how you think about the exam? Meaning, are you already assuming you're going to fail and you're already calculating what mark you need to pass? And it's like, if I get a 50, then I can get a 70. Like you're already calculating that. What is your, like, how are you perceiving it? How are you talking about it yourself? How are you planning for it? Those are the things that slowly you'll learn from each experience. Because when you go through an experience, like Sobia was saying how, you know, Allah doesn't burden you with more than you can bear. But the other thing she said was every experience and every moment is an opportunity for you to get closer to Allah. It is a learning experience, meaning you're going through an exam and it is tough, but you're not just learning how to do the exam. You're also learning how to, just how to, meaning, okay, you're going through the exam and that's just the content you learn for the exam. But then, you know, what's the rest of it that you learn? There's so much more that you can learn. So the idea of resilience is being open to those learning experiences. That's, at least that's how I see it.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. Yeah. No. Actually, like that's one of the tips in the exam care kit. Do the brothers have any questions? Yes.
Um, so if anything, let's say you're going through a crisis, whether it's like stress. And the thing that happens with stress is you have tunnel vision. So you become very narrow visioned. Your heart starts beating. You might get sweaty. You start blinking. Your throat gets dry. All of these things happen as a reaction to stress. And oftentimes, you're not quite aware of your body. You're going through it. And the thing that grounding does, grounding is essentially you becoming more familiar with your body. You're trying to become much more connected to that part, because part of what a stress response is it's a stress response of the what could be and what's happening and what's going to happen as a result. So you're now in the future. Mentally, you're in the future, you're in the past, you're in the present, you're all over the place. But grounding says, okay, let's bring it back to the present. Let's bring it back to right now. So a grounding technique that you'll find in the exam care kit is like a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, where you're like 5 things you see, 4 things you can touch. Yes. So it's like, it's a thing where you're bringing yourself back to a reality that you were 2 seconds ago not aware of. You weren't even open to. And it's a very helpful coping strategy for when that panic or the stress is setting in and you feel like you're kind of in another dimension. So that's like, that is kind of what grounding is, but I don't know, you can add more.
Like your body, when you're stressed, your nervous system essentially goes into a fight or flight response. It's like if all of a sudden there was a black bear in this room, you guys would not be like tucking in your chair as you leave. You're just gonna sprint. You're not even gonna take your laptop. So when you're in a fight or flight response, that's kind of what happens with your nervous system is you're not thinking like executive function, like higher order thinking. You're just on survival mode. And what grounding does is that it reminds you like, hey, there's no one about to attack me. Like I'm not in a dangerous physical situation, but I'm actually just in this moment right now and I'm safe. It's about like establishing a sense of safety. So you can either like there's many different ways. The 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 method. You can splash your face with cold water. You make wudu. There's like so many different ones, like deep breathing. There's many different ones, but they just help you feel physically calm, which allows you to think better. Okay, Jazakallah khair everyone for coming. If you have any more questions, you can always reach out to us and hope you have a good rest of your night. Take care. Assalamu alaikum.